The sound of my key turning in the lock at 12:47 a.m. should have been quiet enough not to wake anyone. I had practiced this routine before, slipping off my heels in the hallway, tiptoeing across the hardwood floor, avoiding the creaky spot near Mia's bedroom door. But as I rounded the corner into our living room, I found Evan sitting in his favorite armchair, laptop closed, hands folded in his lap like he was waiting for a confession. "Hey," I whispered, forcing a tired smile. "You're up late." Evan's eyes met mine, and I could see something different in them. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of quiet disappointment that made my stomach clench. "So are you, Alethea. It's almost 1 in the morning." I dropped my purse on the coffee table and stretched my arms above my head, putting on my best exhausted worker performance. I know. The quarterly reports were due tomorrow, and you know how Mr. Peterson gets when things aren't perfect. Colin and I had to stay late to finish the logistics spreadsheets. Colin again. Evan's voice was flat, emotionless. "What's that supposed to mean?" I snapped, then immediately softened my tone. I couldn't afford to sound defensive. "He's my coworker, Evan. We work on the same projects. Of course we stay late together sometimes." Evan stood up slowly, and I noticed he was still fully dressed. Jeans, button-down shirt, even his watch. He hadn't been sleeping at all. He'd been waiting. "Your office closes at 6, Alethea. Security locks the building at 8, I called. My heart started racing, but I kept my expression neutral. This was exactly the kind of controlling behavior that drove me crazy about Evan. Always checking up on me, always questioning my every move. The cleaning crew let us back in. We had permission from Mr. Peterson. "God, Evan, do you really think I'm lying about working late?" "I think you're lying about something." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could feel my cheeks burning, but I forced myself to look hurt rather than angry. "I can't believe you're doing this. I work my ass off to help pay for this apartment, to help take care of Mia, and this is the thanks I get? Accusations and interrogations when I walk through the door?" Evan's expression didn't change. "Where did you park?" "What?" "Your car. Where did you park tonight?" I blinked, trying to process why that mattered. "The usual spot, the garage on 5th Street. Why?" "Because your car's been in our building's parking garage since 6:30. Mrs. Chen from 4B mentioned she saw you getting out of someone else's car around 7, then leaving again around 11. The bottom dropped out of my stomach, but I forced myself to laugh. "Mrs. Chen is 80 years old and half blind, Evan. She probably saw someone else entirely. And yes, I moved my car earlier because there was construction on 5th Street. Is that okay with you, or do I need written permission to park in our own building?" My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How did things go with Evan tonight? Remember, honey, you don't owe him an explanation for every little thing. He worries too much." I glanced at the message and felt a surge of validation. Mom was right. Evan was being completely unreasonable. I was a grown woman with a demanding job, and I shouldn't have to account for every minute of my day like I was some kind of prisoner. "Look," I said, sitting down on the couch and patting the cushion beside me. "I'm sorry I was so late. I know you worry. But you have to trust me, Evan. We've been together for 3 years. I would never do anything to hurt you or Mia." Evan stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "I'm going to bed." As he walked toward our bedroom, I called after him. "Are you seriously going to stay mad about this?" "I was working, Evan. I was working to help support our family." He paused in the doorway without turning around. "I know what you were doing, Alethea. The question is whether you're going to keep lying about it." After he disappeared down the hallway, I sat alone in the living room, my hands shaking slightly as I deleted the text thread between Colin and me, just to be safe. There was nothing incriminating in those messages anyway, just friendly workplace banter and logistics about our project. But Evan was clearly in some kind of paranoid spiral, and I didn't need to feed into his delusions. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Mom. "If he can't handle you having male friends at work, that's his problem, not yours. Don't let him make you feel guilty for being successful." I smiled and typed back, "You're right. He's just being insecure." From down the hallway, I heard Mia's small voice. "Mommy? Why are you and Daddy talking so loud?" My heart clenched. "Go back to sleep, baby. Everything's fine." But as I finally headed to bed myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was very much not fine. Evan's behavior tonight was different. More controlled, more calculating. Usually when he got jealous or suspicious, he'd raise his voice, demand answers, storm around the apartment. Tonight he'd been almost eerily calm, like he was gathering information rather than seeking reassurance. I slipped into bed beside him, and he didn't move or acknowledge my presence. His breathing was too even, too controlled. He was awake, just pretending to sleep. "Evan," I whispered. "I love you. You know that, right?" Silence. I closed my eyes and tried to push down the growing knot of anxiety in my chest. Tomorrow I would smooth things over. I would bring him coffee in bed. Maybe suggest we take Mia to the park. Remind him why we worked as a family. This whole thing would blow over, just like our other arguments always did. But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me tonight. Not with anger or hurt, but with something that looked almost like pity, as if he felt sorry for me. That should have been my first warning. The next morning, I arrived at the office determined to put the previous night's drama behind me. Evan had already left for work by the time I woke up, and Mia was unusually quiet during breakfast, picking at her cereal and asking if Daddy was mad at her. I assured her that everything was fine, that grown-ups sometimes have disagreements, but it doesn't mean anything is wrong. But as I walked into the break room to grab my usual morning coffee, I immediately sensed something was off. The conversation between Janet from accounting and Mike from shipping stopped abruptly when they saw me, and they both suddenly became very interested in their respective phones. "Morning," I said cheerfully, filling my mug from the coffee machine. "Oh, hey Alethea," Janet replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "How are you doing?" "Great, ready to tackle another day." I stirred cream into my coffee and turned to face them. "What were you two talking about? Looked pretty intense." Mike cleared his throat. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." But I could tell it wasn't work stuff. There was an awkwardness in the air, the kind that comes when people have been talking about you and suddenly you appear. I'd felt it before, usually when office gossip was making the rounds. Colin walked in just then, looking annoyingly fresh and well-rested. "Morning, Alethea. Thanks again for staying late yesterday to finish those reports. I owe you lunch." "No problem," I said, conscious of Janet and Mike listening to our exchange. "That's what teamwork is all about." "Absolutely. Hey, did you get home okay? I felt bad about dropping you off so late." My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. Why was he bringing this up in front of other people? "Yeah, fine. Thanks for the ride." Janet and Mike exchanged a look that I pretended not to notice. After they left the break room, I turned to Colin with what I hoped was a casual expression. "Listen, maybe we should keep the details of our work schedule between us. You know how people like to gossip around here." Colin looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, some people might get the wrong idea about us working late together, or you giving me rides home. It's innocent, but you know how rumors start." Oh, his face fell slightly. "I hadn't thought about that. I was just trying to be helpful." "And I appreciate it, I really do. Let's just be a little more discreet, okay?" The rest of the morning passed normally, but I couldn't shake the feeling that people were watching me more closely than usual. When I passed by the reception desk, I caught the tail end of what sounded like a whispered conversation about after-hours activities, and when I walked into the copy room, two women from HR suddenly stopped talking and smiled at me with the kind of fake brightness that screamed, "We were just discussing you." Around 11, my phone rang. "Mom, hi honey, how are things with Evan today?" I stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. "Better, I think. He was gone before I woke up, but that's probably for the best. Let him cool off." "Good. I've been thinking about what you told me last night, and I'm really concerned about his behavior. This level of suspicion and control isn't healthy, Alethea." "I know. I think he's just stressed about work and taking it out on me." "That's no excuse. You're a loyal, hard-working woman, and you deserve a partner who trusts you. The fact that he's questioning your work schedule and interrogating you about where you park your car, that's borderline abusive behavior." I felt a surge of validation. Mom was right. Evan's behavior last night had been completely out of line. He actually called my office to check up on me. Can you believe that? That's horrifying. What's next? Hiring a private investigator? "Honey, you need to set some serious boundaries here. You're not his prisoner." After I hung up with Mom, I felt much better about the whole situation. Evan was clearly the one with the problem, not me. I was just trying to do my job and advance my career. And if that meant working late with attractive male colleagues sometimes, well, that was just the reality of modern professional life. But my improved mood didn't last long. Around 2 in the afternoon, I got a call from HR asking me to come in for a routine discussion about my timesheet discrepancies. Apparently, there were several instances in the past month where I'd clocked out at 5, but the building's security system showed my keycard being used to re-enter after hours. "It's no big deal," Sandra from HR assured me. "We just need to make sure our records are accurate for payroll purposes. Can you help us understand these after-hours entries?" I explained about the special projects Colin and I were working on. The permission from Mr. Peterson, the cleaning crew letting us back in. Sandra nodded and made notes, but I could tell she wasn't entirely satisfied with my explanation. "And these late-night departures, those are all work-related as well?" "Of course. Sometimes the projects run longer than expected." "I see. And Colin Weber can verify these work sessions?" "Absolutely." But as I walked back to my desk, I felt a growing sense of unease. Why was HR suddenly interested in my schedule? Had someone complained? Had Evan called them too? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You should be more careful. Parking garage cameras see everything." My blood ran cold. I stared at the message, reading it over and over. Who would send something like this? And what did they mean about parking garage cameras? I quickly deleted the message and tried to focus on my work, but my concentration was shot. Every time someone walked by my desk, I wondered if they were the one who'd sent the text. Every time my phone made a sound, my heart jumped. By 5 o'clock, I was a nervous wreck. I packed up my things and headed for the elevator, desperate to get out of the office and away from all the suspicious looks and whispered conversations. But as I waited for the elevator, Colin appeared beside me. "Hey, everything okay? You seemed a little stressed today." "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "Long week." "Tell me about it." "Listen, I was thinking maybe we should grab dinner sometime. You know, away from all this work stress. There's this great Italian place downtown." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside without answering. Colin followed, looking hopeful. "I can't," I said finally. "I have a boyfriend and a daughter." "Oh," his face fell. "I didn't realize it was serious. I thought you were single." The elevator reached the ground floor, and I practically ran out into the lobby. Why had Colin gotten that impression? Had I said something to make him think I was available? I replayed our recent conversations in my mind, trying to remember if I'd been too friendly, too flirtatious. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. "Evan." "Hi," I said, trying to sound normal. "We need to talk when you get home." "About what?" "You know what." The line went dead, and I stood in the parking garage staring at my phone, feeling like the walls were closing in around me. The anonymous text, HR's questions, Colin's dinner invitation, and now Evan's ominous phone call. Everything was spiraling out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. I drove home in a daze, practicing explanations in my head. I would tell Evan about the HR meeting, frame it as harassment and overreach. I would mention Colin's inappropriate dinner invitation as proof that I was the victim here, not the perpetrator. I would turn this whole thing around and make Evan see that I was the one being unfairly targeted and suspected. But as I pulled into our building's parking garage, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There, mounted in the corner near the entrance, was a security camera I'd never paid attention to before. A little red light blinked steadily, indicating it was recording. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at that camera and trying to remember exactly what it might have captured over the past few weeks. Colin dropping me off, the two of us talking in his car before I got out, the way I'd touched his arm when I thanked him for the ride. From the outside, looking at that footage, what would someone think they were seeing? I needed allies, and I needed them fast. The next day was Saturday, which meant my weekly coffee date with Mom and her friend Patricia at our usual spot downtown. If anyone would understand my situation and offer support, it would be them. The coffee house was busy, filled with the weekend crowd of families and couples enjoying their leisurely morning routines. I spotted Mom and Patricia at our regular table by the window, already deep in conversation about something that had them both looking indignant. "There she is," Mom said, standing to give me a hug. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "I've been better," I admitted, settling into my chair with a large latte. "Things with Evan are getting worse." Patricia leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. She'd never particularly liked Evan, always thought he was too quiet and controlling for my personality. "What's he doing now?" I took a deep breath and launched into my story. carefully framing everything to highlight Evan's unreasonable behavior and my own innocence. I told them about his interrogation when I came home late, his calls to my office, his paranoid suspicions about my work schedule. He's making me feel like a criminal in my own home, I said, letting my voice crack slightly. I can't even work late without him assuming I'm up to something inappropriate. That's emotional abuse, Patricia declared, stirring her cappuccino aggressively. Classic controlling behavior. He's trying to isolate you from your colleagues and make you dependent on him for validation. Mom nodded vigorously. I've been worried about this for months. The way he questions everything you do. The way he makes you feel guilty for having a career and ambitions. It's not healthy, Alethea. The worst part is, there's this guy at work, Colin, who's been nothing but professional and helpful. We work on projects together. Sometimes we stay late. Sometimes he gives me rides when my car's in the shop. Completely innocent workplace friendship. But Evan has turned it into some kind of sordid affair in his head. Men do that, Patricia said knowingly. They can't imagine that a woman can have a platonic relationship with an attractive male colleague. It's all projection and insecurity. Exactly. And now Colin's getting weird vibes from me, because I have to be so careful about everything. Yesterday he asked me to dinner, just as friends, just to get away from work stress, and I had to turn him down because I knew Evan would lose his mind if he found out. You turned down a dinner invitation because of Evan's jealousy? Mom looked horrified. Honey, that's not normal. You're allowed to have friends. You're allowed to have a social life outside of your relationship. I know, but you don't understand how he gets. Last night he was waiting up for me like some kind of prison warden, demanding to know where I parked, who I talked to, what time I left the office. It was humiliating. Patricia shook her head. This is how it starts, you know. First they control your work relationships, then your friendships, then your family connections. Before you know it, you're completely isolated and dependent on them for everything. What should I do? I asked, letting my voice sound small and vulnerable. I love him, and I love our life together, but I can't live like this. I can't walk on eggshells every day, wondering if something I do or say is going to trigger another interrogation. You need to set boundaries, Mom said firmly. Tell him that his behavior is unacceptable, and that if he can't trust you, then maybe you need to reevaluate the relationship. Give him an ultimatum, Patricia added. Either he gets therapy for his control issues, or you're done. Don't let him turn you into a victim of his insecurities. I felt a warm glow of validation spreading through my chest. This was exactly what I needed to hear. Confirmation that I was the reasonable one in this situation. That Evan's behavior was the problem, not my friendship with Colin or my work schedule. There's something else, I said, lowering my voice conspiratorially. I think he might be monitoring my phone or my computer. Yesterday I got this weird anonymous text about parking garage cameras, like someone was watching me or following me. What if Evan hired someone to spy on me? Both women looked shocked and outraged. And that's illegal, Patricia said. You could press charges. I don't have proof, I said, but the timing was too convenient. Right after our fight, right after HR started asking questions about my work schedule. It feels like he's building some kind of case against me. HR is asking questions? Mom looked concerned. Why? Probably because Evan called them. Or maybe he's been spreading rumors about me and Colin. I don't know, but suddenly everyone at work is acting weird around me, like they think something inappropriate is going on. This is harassment, Patricia declared. Professional sabotage. You should document everything and consider talking to a lawyer. We spent the next hour dissecting Evan's behavior, analyzing his motivations, and planning my response strategy. By the time we were ready to leave, I felt completely justified in my actions and utterly convinced that I was the victim of an unfair campaign of suspicion and control. But as we stood up to go, I noticed a familiar figure at a table near the back of the coffee house. Evan was sitting alone, a newspaper open in front of him, but his eyes were fixed on our table. Our gazes met across the crowded room, and I felt a jolt of shock and embarrassment. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He folded his newspaper slowly, left money on the table, and walked toward the exit without looking at me again. Was that Evan? Mom asked, following my gaze. Yes. How much do you think he heard? I don't know, but I had a sinking feeling that he'd heard enough. The way he'd looked at me, not with anger or hurt, but with something that looked almost like disappointment and resignation, made my stomach clench with anxiety. Patricia put her hand on my arm, Don't you dare feel guilty about this. You have every right to talk to your mother and friends about your relationship problems. If he was eavesdropping, that just proves how controlling and invasive he's become. She's right, Mom agreed. You're not the one doing anything wrong here, Alethea. Remember that. I nodded and hugged them both goodbye. But as I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the image of Evan's face when he'd seen me at that table, talking about him, painting him as an abusive and controlling partner to my mother and her friend. For just a moment, I wondered if I'd been unfair in my characterization of our problems. But then I reminded myself that everything I'd said was true. He had been suspicious and controlling. He had been questioning my every move. He had been making me feel like a prisoner in my own relationship. If he didn't like hearing the truth about his behavior, maybe that would motivate him to change it. But as I drove home, I had the uncomfortable feeling that I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and that whatever happened next was going to be much worse than anything that had come before. I spent the drive home rehearsing my defense. If Evan confronted me about the coffeehouse conversation, I would stand my ground. I had every right to discuss my relationship concerns with my mother and friends. If he didn't like what he'd overheard, maybe he should examine his own behavior instead of blaming me for talking about it. But when I walked into our apartment, Evan was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, looking calmer than I'd expected. Mia was in the living room watching cartoons, her small voice providing a soundtrack of innocent chatter that made the tension in the air feel even more pronounced. "How was coffee with your mom?" Evan asked without looking up from his screen. "Fine." I set my purse down and opened the refrigerator, pretending to look for something. "How was your morning?" "Educational." The word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning I didn't want to unpack. I closed the refrigerator and turned to face him. "Evan, if you have something to say to me, just say it." He closed his laptop and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd walked in. "I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's been going on." "I've been honest with you." "No, you haven't." His voice was quiet, controlled. "And I think you know that." My heart started racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Alethea, I need you to show me your phone." The request hit me like a physical blow. "Excuse me?" "Your phone. I want to see your text messages." "Absolutely not." I crossed my arms over my chest. "I'm not a child, Evan. I'm not going to hand over my personal property so you can go through it looking for evidence of crimes I didn't commit." "Then you're admitting there's something to find." "I'm admitting that I value my privacy, and I don't appreciate being treated like a suspect in my own home." Evan stood up slowly, and I noticed he looked tired. Not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted, like he'd been carrying a heavy weight for days. "3 weeks ago, you started working late every Tuesday and Thursday, always with Colin, always until after midnight. Your timesheets show you clocking out at 5, but the building security logs show you re-entering after hours." My mouth went dry. I explained that we have permission from Mr. Peterson for special projects. "I called Mr. Peterson yesterday." The bottom dropped out of my stomach, but I forced myself to look indignant rather than panicked. "You called my boss." "Evan, that's completely inappropriate. You could get me fired." "He doesn't know about any special projects requiring after-hours work. He said if you and Colin have been staying late, it's not with his knowledge or permission." "He's confused. There are multiple projects happening. Stop." Evan's voice was sharp enough to cut through my explanation. "Just stop lying to me." From the living room, Mia's voice called out, "Daddy, are you and Mommy fighting again?" "We're just talking, sweetheart," Evan called back, but his eyes never left my face. "Alethea, I'm going to ask you one more time. Show me your phone. And I'm going to tell you one more time, no." This is exactly what I was talking about with my mother this morning. This controlling, paranoid behavior. I won't enable it. Something shifted in Evan's expression. "So you were talking about me at the coffee house." "I was talking about our relationship problems, yes, with my mother and her friend, because I needed perspective on what's been happening here. What's been happening here is that my girlfriend has been lying to me for weeks about where she goes and who she's with. And when I ask for basic honesty, she turns it around and makes me the villain." "Because you are being the villain." The words came out louder than I'd intended, and I saw Mia's head turn toward the kitchen. I lowered my voice. "You're acting like a jealous, controlling boyfriend who doesn't trust his partner to have normal workplace relationships. Normal workplace relationships don't require deleting text messages." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "Your phone bill, Alethea. I have access to our account, remember? I can see when texts are sent and received, even if I can't see the content. You've been exchanging messages with Colin's number almost daily for the past 3 weeks. Long conversations, often late at night. And then, suddenly, yesterday morning, your message history with his number completely disappears. I felt like I was drowning, but I forced myself to keep fighting. So now you're monitoring my phone records? Do you realize how crazy that sounds? Do you realize how guilty you sound? I deleted those messages because they were work-related, and I needed storage space on my phone. There was nothing inappropriate in them. Then why won't you let me see the messages you haven't deleted? Because this whole conversation is insane, Evan. Because I shouldn't have to prove my innocence to you like I'm on trial. Because healthy relationships are built on trust, not surveillance and interrogation. Evan stared at me for a long moment, then walked over to his laptop and turned the screen toward me. Mrs. Chen wasn't confused about what she saw. The parking garage security camera confirms it. You, getting out of Colin's car at 11:43 p.m. last Thursday. The two of you talking for several minutes before you went inside. Him touching your hand through the car window before he drove away. The image on the screen was grainy but unmistakable. There I was, leaning into Colin's passenger window, his hand covering mine on the door frame. From this angle, it looked intimate, romantic, like a secret goodbye between lovers. It's not what it looks like, I said weakly. Then tell me what it is. I opened my mouth, but no explanation came out. Because the truth was, it had felt romantic in that moment. Colin had been sweet and attentive all evening, listening to my complaints about Evan, making me feel appreciated and understood. When he'd covered my hand with his, I hadn't pulled away. I'd enjoyed the attention, the validation, the feeling of being desired by someone who didn't question my every move. But nothing had actually happened. We hadn't kissed, hadn't made plans to meet outside of work, hadn't crossed any physical lines that constituted actual cheating. We were just talking, I said finally, about work, about life. He's a good listener. What kind of things about life? I don't know. General things. Stress, relationships, family stuff. You were talking to him about our relationship. It wasn't a question, and I realized there was no point in denying it. Sometimes, when things were tense between us, yes, I might have mentioned it. So you were having intimate conversations with another man about problems in our relationship, staying out until midnight, deleting your text messages, and lying to me about all of it. But I'm supposed to believe nothing inappropriate happened. Nothing did happen. Something happened, Alethea. Maybe not sex, maybe not kissing, but something happened. You developed feelings for him. You started looking forward to those late-night conversations more than coming home to me. You started sharing parts of yourself with him that you used to share with me. The accuracy of his words hit me like a slap. Because he was right. I had started looking forward to my time with Colin. I had started feeling more understood and appreciated by him than by Evan. I had started imagining what it would be like to be with someone who didn't question my every decision. But that wasn't cheating. That was just human nature. I want you to leave, I said suddenly. I want you to pack a bag and go stay with your mother for a few days while we both cool off and figure out what we want to do here. I'm not leaving Mia. Fine. Then I'll leave. I'll take Mia and go to my mother's. You're not taking my daughter anywhere. The possessive way he said my daughter sent a chill down my spine. Mia was our daughter, not his property to control and manipulate. She's my daughter too, Evan, and I think she's been through enough of this toxic atmosphere. The toxic atmosphere you created by lying and sneaking around with another man. The toxic atmosphere you created by being a paranoid, controlling boyfriend who doesn't trust the woman he claims to love. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, and I realized we'd reached an impasse. Neither of us was going to back down. Neither of us was going to admit fault, and neither of us was going to let the other leave with Mia. I'm going to my mother's for the night, I said finally, alone, to think about whether this relationship is worth saving. And you should think about whether you want to be with someone you obviously don't trust or respect. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, but Evan's voice stopped me. Alethea, I turned back, hoping to see some softness in his expression, some indication that he wanted to work things out. Instead, he was holding an envelope. You've been served. The words didn't make sense at first. I stared at the envelope, then at his face, trying to process what was happening. Served with what? Custody papers, financial separation documents, a restraining order requiring you to stay away from Colin Weber. My legs went weak. You can't be serious. I've been documenting everything for 2 weeks, Alethea. The lies, the deleted messages, the after-hours meetings, the parking garage footage. I have enough evidence to show a pattern of deception and inappropriate behavior that puts Mia's stability at risk. You bastard. The word came out as a whisper, but it carried all the rage and betrayal I felt. You manipulative, vindictive bastard. I gave you multiple chances to tell me the truth. You chose to keep lying. I ripped open the envelope with shaking hands, scanning the legal documents inside. Temporary custody arrangement, asset freeze, behavioral restrictions. The language was formal and cold, but the message was clear. Evan had been planning this for days, maybe weeks. While I thought we were having relationship problems that could be worked out, he'd been building a legal case against me. This won't hold up in court, I said, my voice shaking. I haven't done anything illegal. I haven't hurt Mia. I haven't even technically cheated on you. Technically. He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. That's what this all comes down to for you, isn't it? Technicalities. What you can get away with without crossing legal lines. I want a lawyer. You should get one. I looked at the man I'd lived with for 3 years. The man who'd helped me raise my daughter. The man I'd thought I might marry someday. He looked like a stranger. I can't believe you're doing this to our family. I'm protecting our family. From you. The cruelty of those words took my breath away. But as I stared into Evan's eyes, I realized he genuinely believed them. In his mind, I was the threat, the destructive force that needed to be contained and controlled. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't entirely wrong.